We have these perceptions, right? Or these perceived notions of what we are capable of. And we usually sell ourselves short. And I remind people that you have more in you than you think you do. And it's not cliche. I've seen it for years from people.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspect of running, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Have you guys heard of Beam? I have been absolutely loving their products lately. Beam is a CBD company that's making waves in the running world by offering products that combine THC-free CBD with other high-quality ingredients. It was founded by two ex-professional athletes with the idea that everyone should have the chance to experience what better feels like. Whether you're sore or stressed, Beam is key for recovery and self-care. Try it for yourself with 15% off using the code FTLR from beamtlc.com. I recommend Beam Dream Powder or the Focus Capsules. Welcome back. I've got Yuri Hauswald joining me on the podcast today. Yuri, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
I'm super excited to be on your cast. The last time I saw you was in person was the Olympic marathon trials in Atlanta.
That was a hell of a time. So we're going to be calling this episode For the Long Ride because you are a long rider. So before we dive too far into it, who is Yuri?
Oh man, that's a deep question.
Loaded question.
How much time do we have here?
About 57 minutes.
Okay. I'll try to give you my elevator pitch here on who I am. So I grew up on a farm in rural Northern California. Grew up without a TV, had all the farm chores growing up. Sports were an integral part of my youth. I played baseball and soccer until I went to high school. And then my sports were lacrosse, football, and baseball. And lacrosse became my sport of choice and my ticket to college. I went to Cal Berkeley, where I was the captain of the lacrosse team my junior and senior year and received multiple all-star accolades and stuff like that my junior and senior year, and got a degree in American literature with a minor in African American literature. Towards the end of my tenure at Cal, I realized that I wanted to be a school teacher, or I thought I wanted to be a school teacher. And had the opportunity upon graduating to go back to Pennsylvania. I packed up my Volkswagen van. I cut off my hair because I had shoulder length locks. I didn't think they would take too kindly of, the hippie guy from Northern California showing up at a prep school in Pennsylvania. Went back to Pennsylvania and worked in their summer program and was made a favorable impression. And they hired me to stay on and work in their English department. I taught English as a second language, and then American Lit. And my last year there, I got to design a course on the Beat Generation, which was one of my passions. Pennsylvania is where I discovered the bike. I was not a cyclist up to that point. I mean, I knew how to ride a bike, but biking was not part of my athletic DNA at that point. So that was I was 24. And it's all due to a couple, Mark and Ellen Nelson, who were avid cyclists, huge mountain bikers, friends of mine, and they shared their passion with me, which is something you and I can circle back to at some point. But just this idea of sharing your learnings, your passions, things you love doing with others, you never know how that might affect them, right? Or inspire them. And their sharing of their joy of mountain biking led me to where I am today to some degree, 25 years later. I got into mountain biking. We can talk about that. But my current job, I'm the elite athlete manager for GU. I wear a bunch of different hats. I race professionally as a gravel endurance racer. I write for some magazines here and there. do media camps. I'm the lead ride guide for the Cyclist Menu gravel camps, which happen all over the country. I just finished a couple camps down in Arizona. And as we were just chatting about, I'm also an ifit, I guess, trainer making inspirational riding videos now. So there's more there. We can unearth it later, but that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, I love it. You're doing what so many people dream of, which is like every day you wake up and you get to do what you love, whether it's managing a team of athletes, whether it's doing your own athletic pursuits and training to get there, or writing about it, or inspiring other people to do it. Like I feel like so many people listening are dreaming of a role in a life like yours. So talk to me about how you've gotten to the place you're at today, and this isn't a video interview, and people can't see your face right now, but Yuri is like beaming with what looks like pride and happiness. So talk to me about that. What did you ever envision doing what you're doing today?
No, that's why I wish people could see my face. Is like there was never a point when I was like consciously like this is what I want to be doing, like where I'm at right now. It's, been a combination of obviously, chasing my passions, which I wholeheartedly encourage people to do, whatever they may be, and chasing all of them as hard as you can. It's, obviously a bit of hard work. It's also, I think, just boils down to the real simple thing of like being a good person. And hopefully that doesn't sound cliche, but like doing what you say you're going to do, being kind, being responsible, those things, I think it gets lost in our hectic lives sometimes. Like those are sort of like foundational to like what helps build you up in your careers, in my opinion. So it wasn't like a direct path to where I am either, it's sort of been a zigzag all over the place. I taught elementary school after I taught back east at the prep school, I came back to California. I was totally bitten by the mountain biking race bug. This was a time when the Norba race circuit was still king. That circuit no longer exists anymore, but I had to have a day job because I wasn't that good at riding my bike, really. And I taught elementary school for 12 years while I was also racing during spring break, following the race circuit all summer. I also started a junior mountain bike team at that time. So I was beginning to make inroads into the industry. And this was purely me, once again, just like not really knowing what I'm doing, but like, hey, I'm going to put together a proposal. I'm going to go to the trade show and I'm just going to go say hi to people, brands that I'm aware, know somebody at or am familiar with or love their products. And that's kind of how it got started. And then I started developing relationships with brands, some of the brands I've been with for a long, long time as a racer personally. And then I managed a small mountain bike team for a boutique bike brand called Soulcraft, which was an offshoot out of Salsa Cycles, which is one of the biggest sort of bike packing gravel brands right now. That brand actually got started here in my hometown. And like I said earlier, too, some of it is just dumb luck. I stumbled into here in Petaluma, where I live, a crew of folks that were some of the OG, like beginning, like mountain bike founders. Scott Nickel, who started Ibis Cycles, Ross Schaefer, who started Salsa. I knew Joe Breeze, who was part of the early crew with like Gary Fisher and Otis Guy and stuff like that. So it's just I just sort of stumbled into it. But then, just kept chasing that dream of eventually trying to turn pro. Not that those three letters were going to change anything, right, with my day job. Because like I said, I wasn't an upper tier racer ever, never have been in my career. And it wasn't like endorsements or, big checks were going to come flowing in, but it was more of a personal goal for me to try to reach that final level, and so, yeah. And then, Goo was one of my nutrition sponsors. I've been with Goo for 15 years as an athlete, and I've been in the office now for 9 years prior to going to Goo. So I stepped out of the classroom in 2008 to take a job for my bike sponsor at that time. Just another sort of one of those dumb luck opportunities. We're at the trade show in Sea Otter, and I was hanging out with like all the international sales guys and some of the marketing guys from Marin Bikes, which is one of the founding bike companies too. I think they started in '86. We were hanging out in the hotel, and they're like, "Hey, man, like you're good at talking with people and communicating. Like you should come work in our marketing department." the thought of working in the bike industry had not crossed my mind prior to that. I mean, I loved racing bikes. I loved being on the circuit. I loved the community, the camaraderie, the family of it, like the traveling circus. But I'd never thought like I could have a job in the bike industry because, I was an English major. I had no formal training in marketing or anything like that. And, a couple of the guys were like, yeah, you should come work for us. And I was sort of disillusioned with teaching at that time, a little bit fried. And I think that was in April of 2008, and I decided to take the leap. And when the school year ended, that was my last year teaching, and I went to work for Marin Bikes. And I think this speaks to this idea of taking that leap of faith sometimes in our athletic lives, our work lives, right? Taking that challenge that maybe scares you a bit, makes you pucker up and think like, I don't know if I can do that. And I found that I've had a lot of moments like that in my life, whether it was athletically or with work, where you then make the most gains, right? You gain the most from challenging yourself like that, or doing something that scares you a little bit.
There's a lot to unpack there, but yes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm a talker, dude. Yeah.
I know. I love all that. So people always apologize. They're like, sorry for the long answer. I'm like, it's a podcast. That's the intent. So what I love there is what I like to call the right place at the right time with the right experience. And that's how I got my job at Insight Tracker. Like, I wasn't looking for a job, but I happened to get lucky at a networking event and I had the right experience to open the door. And I think that so much, particularly in the outdoor space, is about who you know. It's not necessarily what you know. It's like where you want to be and what you do and what makes you tick, and connecting that with the people who can get shit done. And so I love that story, like an English major going to work in the bike industry.
As their marketing manager.
As the marketing manager. Yeah. It's like, okay, communication skills, pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So talking about the intersection of being an elite athlete and working with elite athletes, what has been the biggest surprise for you?
Well, oh man, I have to say I do have I feel like the best job in the industry, and a lot of my friends like to joke that they don't think I ever work, right? Because all they do is see me ride my bike and traveling around, but that's actually kind of part of my work somehow, which is really unique and rare. Because one of the main gripes in the bike industry, and you may hear this in your segment too, is as soon as I got into the bike industry, I wasn't able to ride my bike anymore, right? Because they have to work so hard or this. And then that's totally true. And I realize I'm in a really fortunate, lucky position. I would like to throw out the caveat that I don't consider myself an elite athlete, but I do have a tremendous amount of athletic experience, particularly on the endurance side of things, that I think allows me to identify, communicate, like commiserate or have empathy for what all of my athletes are going through. And I have the deepest respect for what they all do. And I deal with athletes from the Queen of Pain, Rebecca Rush, to like Mirinda Carfrae and everything in between, so cyclists to ultra runners. I mean, I just had a rad chat 2 weeks ago with Luke Nelson, who did the Barclays Marathon.
Future podcast guest. Thank you.
For sure. Luke is rad. But, I guess one of the main surprises is, and maybe I'm just lucky, but they're just awesome people like you and I. They're just regular people who happen to be extremely gifted, focused, really talented in their respective athletic field or whatever it is they do, driven. I've really only had like positive experiences with my athletes over my 9 years at GU. And it's truly been an honor to work with them and just, like I said, feel like I have a deeper connection with them because I understand what it's like to be an athlete. I understand what it's like to fight for sponsorship because I have to do that personally as an athlete, because outside of my day job with GU, I do manage sponsor relations for me, Yuri, the brand, or whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Like bike sponsor, tire, clothing, all that stuff that's separate from GU. which I feel like just gives me a better sense of what my athletes are going through and hopefully helps me interact with them better on all levels, whether it's contract stuff or social media asks, basic communications about what's going on, things like that. So it's really been a truly awesome ride, pun intended, to be able to parlay what I have loved in sports to then get to work with some of the best athletes in the world. Really inspiring and awesome, and to be able to call them, I mean, most of them are friends. I mean, Luke, I'd never met Luke in person, but I did the podcast, and then he knew I was in Moab and he was coming back from something. So we had like a 30-minute catch up in the parking lot in Moab before I was going back out on another shoot, just so we could meet in person. It was
That's
really
awesome.
rad up and get some more details about his event, there in Tennessee. And so, yeah, it's been a rad ride. And I just found out, yesterday that most likely I'll be going to Kona, which wasn't a done deal, obviously, with COVID and other things happening. So, go back and get to cheer on Rinny. We'll have a few other athletes, Cherie Grunfeld, who I believe will be 77, and is a legend in the Ironman world. And she and I interviewed her earlier this year. We sort of made a pinky promise that if she decided to go back, that I would make sure I went to Kona too. So I'm trying to uphold that promise so I can go cheer for her and support her in any way. But yeah, it's really, really rewarding. And sometimes I get like goosebumps or tear up a little bit, in all seriousness, when I see them succeed, because, obviously they're not my kids, but like, I don't know. I'm proud of them, because I know what it takes to get to that level, and the commitment and the sacrifice that they have to make to perform like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. So I'm right now hiring for a couple of roles at my day job, and I see the athlete component as being a very critical piece of like a skill that is a huge benefit to being an employee at a company that works in the outdoor industry. I have a friend, Josh Emder, who is he's a concierge MD basically, and we ran together a couple of years ago. And I was like, "What are you training for?" He's like, "My goal is to be able to run with my clients, many of whom are professional athletes, and not get dropped." So like run, be fast enough to run with professional athletes, so that you can be a part of the whole experience, right? Like it's exactly the like I get it. I'm in this world. I understand. And personally, I think my own training allows me to be a better employee because the same exact reason. Like I can relate to these athletes. Like I was talking with Shalane Flanagan about my goal of running sub 250. And like she gets that. She
Yeah.
understands setting the goal that is big and scary. Her marathon's 30 minutes faster than mine, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's the process, it's not the outcome.
Yeah, I would also say I got a couple thoughts there. Athletes, we're good at, maybe analyzing our strengths and weaknesses, right? Figuring out what you need to do to maximize both. Create a plan that's realistic, right, for your skill set. This is exactly what I used to do for my elementary school kids, right? I mean, not everybody's an A student, myself included, but you figure out, what their skills, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then, try to give them some tools so they can perform to their personal best, which is a mantra that I started, singing way back when, because I tried to use my racing as a model for them, that
Yeah.
winning the most important thing. Because for the littles, I taught first, second, and third grade. To them, it was so black and white. Either I won or I was a loser. And seriously,
If you were
every
first, you're last.
Yep. Every weekend I'd come back to be like, Mr. Yuri, did you win? And be like, no, I got fifth, but here's what I learned, or here's what was really fun about it. Circling back to you saying being able to run with your athletes, I had an experience earlier this year with Keegan Swenson, who is hopefully going to get the Olympic nod for the US for the mountain bike. He's fighting with Chris Blevins for that spot, but he's one of the top mountain bikers in the country, in the world. He's a GU athlete. He's a friend. I've known him for a long time, but I was in Tucson and he's like, "Hey, let's go out for a training ride." And so like part of me is like, "Ooh, am I going to be able to kid because he had a big day. He's like, oh yeah, we're going to go out and do 70 miles, which actually ended up being 100. So thanks, Keegan. But at the end of that 100 miles, like you couldn't have smacked the smile off my face because I was so stoked that I was be able to hang on his wheel. Granted, I sat on his wheel for, probably 80 of those miles. It's just one of those really uplifting, rad experiences where like, this is a killer job. I need to keep staying fit so I can continue to do this as long as possible because, we chit-chatted about work and this and that. And it's just super fun to be able to connect with your athletes in that way. I feel like it gives you a little bit more street cred too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I ran an hour with Kara Goucher last week, and like we just talked the whole time, and like you said, these people are just normal humans, and I got like literally 30 messages after this, like, oh, how cool is it that you get to run with Kara Goucher? And it's like, it is fucking cool, and she's a totally normal, down to earth, real person, and she just happens to have run really fast in her career. And that's why, that's why she has the platform that she well, she's a great person and she runs fast. But it's like, yeah, you couldn't wipe the smile off my face after we finished that. And the funniest part of training with elite athletes or running with or biking with elite athletes is encountering other people on those activities, like to see other people running towards us, like with a huge smile on their face, like, that's Kara. Like, I'm going to say hi to her. Like, I'm in Boulder. Like, everybody's a professional athlete here. And it still happens. And then at the end of this run, we're walking through the parking lot and some woman comes up to us and is like, you guys training for anything? Like, clearly either was playing it so cool or didn't know who Kara was. And Kara's like, no, not really. And she's like, well, I am. I'm doing some 5Ks and 10Ks and half Ironman. And like, and so they were like chit-chatting about that. And it's like, this is the point. Like, who gives a shit how fast you run or ride? Like, that doesn't matter. It's the pursuit of excellence and the pursuit of your own personal best, that if you're running a 2-hour marathon, a 3-hour marathon, a 5-hour marathon, a 7-hour marathon, if it takes you 4 hours to ride 100 miles, if it takes you 8 hours to ride 100 miles, it doesn't matter. It's the pursuit of getting better that makes everyone relatable.
Yeah. And sort of an offshoot of that point too is people often ask me like what I look for in athletes, when we're thinking about, maybe expanding our athlete roster or not. And I've said this for years because I speak at like high school mountain bike camps and stuff like that. I've worked closely with the Bear Dev National program. And out of the gate, I tell them, I could care less about your results.
Right.
I want to know that I'm working with like a good person who can engage with the folks. Like you saw that example with Kara and that person. I want somebody who's a great ambassador for our brand. And if you get on the podium, that's a bonus. But I'd rather have you be somebody that people seek out after an event, whether you're on the podium or not, because they know you're a good human being. Those are the kind of folks I want to be involved with.
So like the Mike Wardians of the world.
Exactly. The Mike Wardians, the Rebecca Rushes. Like I look at, I'm obviously really biased, but I look at the roster that we have created at GU and I'm super proud of it because everybody on that roster is very approachable, super knowledgeable in their field, inspirational in their own ways. And yeah, you have, I call Mike Wardian the Energizer Bunny because that guy doesn't gather any moss. He's always moving. And he's always got a smile on his face. He's super approachable. He's willing to work in the booth at GU events. I mean, things like that go a long ways. He's really good about giving me updates, about his calendar and race finishes and press. And you'd be surprised at how hard that side of being an athlete is for many athletes, checking in with their sponsors from time to time. Like, hey, here's some press I got, or hey, here's a couple photos. I was just here or that. Like Mike Wardian is a gem for sure.
Agreed. I saw Mike when he thought he lost his car keys, which would put 99% of the population like into a tizzy and like super angry. And he was just like, Nah, well, I'll deal with it later. Let's do this podcast. We were out in Tahoe.
Oh, nice.
It was right before Broken Arrow, or he had just raced Broken Arrow, I think, and he lost his car keys in the process, and he found them afterwards. But it was like, yeah, let's do the podcast. I'll deal with it later, and he found it later because he's a great person, and karma is good to him.
It is. Yeah. He is he's one of my favorites for sure. Not that I have any favorites, but like if we had to, like he's one of my favorites for sure.
Definitely, and from a brand partner standpoint, or just from a like fan standpoint, any of these athletes are approachable, and the idea, as you said, like they're just normal humans who care so much. Like if you go up to Mike and talk to him, he'll ask you questions about your training, and then if you see him again in 2 years, he'll ask you about that thing you talked about 2 years ago. Before I knew him well, my dad and I ran with him at the Shamrock Marathon, like a little shakeout, in 2015, I want to say. And I didn't know him well until probably 2016 or 2017. And he asked me like 2 years later, he asked about something my dad said 2 years later. He's like, how's that thing going? And I don't even remember what we were talking about, but he did.
Yeah. I will say Mike is a very rare breed. He's definitely, when it comes to pros, he's a pros pro, in my opinion, in my book, in all aspects of how I've, been able to interact with him over the years. Definitely top notch.
For sure. Thanks again to Beam for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. As the days start to warm up and get longer, a cool down routine in the evening becomes even more important. Did you know that you can get a subscription to Beam's Dream Powder? It's what I use most nights before bed to help with a refreshing night's sleep. When you subscribe, you'll get the Dream Blend with a bunch of perks like even better pricing, free shipping, a free mug, and a drink frother just for signing up. Dream helps me wind down at night, and it's made with compounds like melatonin and magnesium that support a better night's sleep. Make sure to use the code FTLR at checkout for an extra 15% off the already discounted 20% off monthly rate. And now back to our conversation. So switching gears back over to you.
Sure.
One of the topics I like to discuss on the podcast. So the whole goal of this podcast is to understand what has allowed people to get to where they are, whether they're an elite athlete, a working professional who has done something awesome or is in a cool place. Like, what are the takeaways that those who are listening can learn? So a topic I like to talk about a lot is success and defining success. So first I'm going to ask, what does success mean to you?
Man, what does success mean to me? I think at the end of the day, really to make it like super simple, like success for me is, maybe reaching, not, I don't set out like a lot of like priority races, or particularly now in the, as I'm hitting sort of the tail end of my racing relevance. But I think success for me now is like, am I happy? Do I have a smile on my face after whatever it is that I have done? And I think, if you boil it down to what we all do here, it needs to be fun. It needs to continue to be fun, because if it's fun, it's going to inspire you to keep chasing those goals, whatever they might be. As we age, we need to modify those and make them continue to keep them, realistic. But for me, success is keeping it fun. And for like where I'm at right now in my career, that's basically, I try to ride my bike almost every day of the week if I can, and interact with my community, particularly now as things are starting to open up more. And so success for me is like keeping it fun. But when, I was working with a coach, which was a couple years ago, leading up to my 2015 Unbound. It's no longer, or back then it was, as we know, it was DK, but now it's Unbound, that big gravel event. Success back then was, following my coach's plan to the T. But that also meant that there was a little bit less of that fun factor in there, but it was a goal I had set my sights on, really like with a laser focus. Like, this is my event that I want to try to get.
He's talking about a 200-mile gravel ride that he won.
Thank you. Yeah, in 2015 in Kansas. It had a different name back then. So success back then was, following those plans, hitting those wattage numbers, doing all of that, and then, you know, crossing that line in first position was huge. But as I was saying, as I've becoming less relevant, or racing has become less important to me, which we could talk about, I think sort of COVID this past year has helped remind me that, you know, I don't need to race anymore to find success or find happiness. It's like, it's riding my bike in beautiful places with amazing people if I can. And then I've been doing a lot of camps lately. And that reminds me of my years in the classroom, right? Where you get to share your passion, your knowledge, hopefully give people some tools, some skills, and then see them succeed, apply them, right? Whether I'm, you know, riding in Patagonia or in Kansas at their camps, that's where I get a lot of reward and fulfillment from now in my career. I'm still competitive, obviously, but like racing is taking more of a back seat for me, which makes sense at my age and stuff like that. So
Yeah, the fun component can't be overstated. I did a podcast with Aisha Pratt-Lear, who's a professional mid-distance runner, and she basically said, if I wasn't still having fun every day, I wouldn't be doing this. And like, she's having so much fun that we had to reschedule our first podcast because Corey McGee hit an 800 meter PR in training, and they went out for mimosas to celebrate. And
yeah,
I'm like, hell yeah, that's the best possible excuse I've ever heard for needing to reschedule something. Like, you're
yeah,
a professional athlete, you're being paid to compete and to win and perform, but for you, fun is at the forefront. And
definitely.
so many amateurs, myself included in the past, get so stuck on numbers and metrics and miles and power and watts and all this stuff, and you forget that, like, we're doing this for fun. Like, it doesn't matter at the end of the day.
100% agree, because I think back to, you know, when I got into the bike, which I shared with you at the beginning of this, is because some friends, you know, wanted to share the fun with me. And it was this, you know, new adventure in the woods there, and being outdoors and pushing my physical limits. And, you know, then you know, the competitive side of me kicked in, and, you know, for 15 or so years, like, racing was important to me, but it wasn't the end all be all, because it wasn't my day job. That's for sure. Obviously, like I said, I wasn't fast. You know, my paycheck or whatever wasn't dependent upon results. So fun should be at the foundation, I feel like, of any of our athletic pursuits. Otherwise, then, yeah, it just, why do it if it's not fun anymore?
Yeah. So the whole basis of this podcast came about after a conversation I had with a GU athlete, Zach Miller, and
Love Zach.
great guy. And ask him about why he runs. He'll give you a 10-minute answer that'll cause you to start a podcast. And that's literally like why this podcast exists. I ran the Manitou Incline with him, and then we went to dinner. And first of all, you talk about eating is training. He put on a clinic. He put down the biggest bowl of Mexican food I'd ever seen in my life, and then ate half of mine as well. And I asked him, I was like, why do you do this? He's like, man, I'm just having so much fun exploring limits. And the conversation, his answer was 10 minutes long, but that was the 10-second summary of it.
I do. I mean, I do have, I don't know if it's an addiction or an affinity for pushing my physical limits. I always have, you know, even from a younger age. There was just something rewarding or fulfilling about it. I mean, I grew up playing team sports, and I think that's, you know, it's its own family of sorts. And, you know, you want to show up and not let down your teammates. So you want to bring your personal best every day, and everybody kind of raises each other up or props each other up. And yeah, it's just
What is
yeah.
it about the exploring limits that you love, though? As a
Well,
solo pursuit.
yeah, yeah, it is for sure. You know, maybe it's a bit of the endorphin high. It's the, like I said earlier, doing something that scares you a little bit. You're not so sure you can do it physically, and that's part of the challenge or the excitement behind it. Yeah, I think those are sort of the main things for me, and just I like to challenge myself physically. I always have, and I've kind of as I've aged, I've sort of keep redrawing the line of what I thought was possible for me, and some of that follows with what I said earlier about taking these challenges or biting off something a little bit more than you thought you could chew. And when I first started my cycling career, it was short cross country races, 25 to 30 miles. And then there was a longer discipline that was like 40 to 60 that sounded interesting and new and a big challenge. And I wasn't sure I could do it. And I did that and was like, oh, wow, I'm actually, I'm a diesel engine, but like I do better at these longer events. Not that I'm not a fast twitch kind of guy. And then somebody dared me to do a 24-hour solo mountain bike race in 2005, and I'd never done one before. And I was like, that sounds like fun. And my wife was there, and the guy who dared me was my mechanic. And then that ended up opening a whole nother door for me, and I could keep going on down that path of different events. We could talk about more, but that have sort of like opened my eyes and shown me. And I think this is something that I try to communicate to a lot of people, is that we have these perceptions, right? Or these perceived notions of what we are capable of. And we usually sell ourselves short. And I remind people that you have more in you than you think you do. And it's not cliche. I've seen it for years from people. I've attended all of the Unbound camps in years past, and that's one of the stories that I try to share with them, is that they have more in them than they think they do. And our mind, Alex Hutchinson's book Endure, that last chapter is all about unlocking the power of the mind, and how that is sort of like one of the last barriers, right, to truly unleashing or unlocking your athletic potential.
So I think that the pursuit of excellence in endurance sports is what allows people to be better in every other aspect of their life. It's this exactly what you're saying. Like, you can do so much more than you think possible. So I read Endure while I was in a speed block and approaching a mile time trial. And I PR'd my mile by like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 seconds, which is a lot.
That
And
is.
in that third and fourth lap, I was thinking about what I was reading in this book, and it's like, you think your brain will limit you so much more, so much earlier than your actual potential. And for me, the belief of my coach of like, no, you're actually capable of like XYZ, has allowed me to suspend my own beliefs of what I think is possible. Like, he thinks I can run a 2:30 something marathon. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, that's not
Yeah.
me. He's like, yes, it is. And
Yeah.
it's like, who cares if I can run that time or not? It's like, I'm going to do whatever I can to find out. And again, it's in a silo. It absolutely does not matter. But what I do for work or what I do in life, like, it carries over there. Like, go ahead.
I was going to say that journey, your personal journey, chasing that will help you in other aspects of your life, because then you can share that knowledge, what you've learned, with athletes that you're working with. It's cool how like so much like positive inspiration and knowledge can sort of spider out from our personal pursuits of things too.
Right. Yeah. So in my role for work, it's very metric based, and the numbers are huge, and I've been at the company for over 6 years. And if you compare the numbers from 6 years ago to where they are now, it's like a whole different ball game. It is a different ball game. And the numbers of where we want to be in 2 to 5 years, it's a completely different ball game. So here I am taking my learnings from just keep showing up, as Des Linden says, like day after
Yes.
day after day after day. Like, you don't eat an elephant in one bite. You don't achieve the goals in one bite. And so it's like, you just suspend the belief of like, this is impossible, and instead focus on, I'm just going to do what I need to do, and the rest will happen. Fall in love with the process,
Yes.
and the outcome may or may not happen, but you'll get closer
Yeah.
where you want to be.
Consistency. I think consistency is just overlooked sometimes in the whole journey or the part of the process. Like being consistent with your training. Like you asked me if I had, I think earlier, about how I sort of got to where I am. But it's just, I try to consistently ride between like 8 and 10,000 miles a year. And I've done that for like a decade now. And that adds up. I have a lot of residual fitness now that has helped get me to where I'm at. But there's so much to like just showing up every day, like you said, and putting that foot in front of the other foot, and then hopefully you just keep taking those steps towards that goal, right? Towards that elephant, right? Which you can't eat in one bite. You keep taking those little steps and you're taking those nibbles, and eventually you've consumed the whole pachyderm. Yeah.
Totally. So I did a
Yeah.
podcast with Jason Fitzgerald. He invited me on to talk about my experience of 2 months at 10,000 feet and the wild progress I saw from a training standpoint. And I was like, look, I haven't done anything spectacular. I've just been consistent. And I do my 5 runs a week, and I sleep and I eat. And the sum of that on a consistent basis of being good consistently outperforms somebody who is great infrequently.
Exactly. That's why, earlier I gave the caveat that I don't consider myself an elite athlete because I don't think I'm gifted. I have shown up, I've done the hard work, and I've enjoyed the journey. And it's, led me to where I am now. It's those little bites of that elephant, I guess, for the past 2 decades.
Yeah, it's the we're getting to some good elephants. So fast forward another 5 to 10 years. What are you really proud of?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I guess, a couple things would be, maybe feeling like I've had some impact on youth development in cycling, kids coming up through the ranks, whether they decide to chase the pro path or whether they go into the industry or trail advocacy. I'd like to, feel like in 5 years that I have created a really rad group, which I have right now, of athletes at GU that are, eat, live, and breathe everything that we sort of stand for as a company, which is, being your personal best in whatever your athletic pursuits are, right? Just we sort of believe in movement, whether that's walking around the block or riding 200 miles on gravel. And I guess, I would just like to, in 5 years or whatever it is, just be remembered as somebody who did a good job in my role and was passionate and, maybe inspired others to chase their dreams and, take some big bites out of things that scared them and then be happily surprised at what they accomplished.
Very cool. So last year I got into gravel riding, and as did many,
I
many,
saw
many
that on the
people.
socials. Yeah.
Yeah, as did many people, as evidenced by the difficulty in buying gravel bikes. And I freaking loved it. It was so fun as a fun way to experience the trails I've been on in an entirely different way. Here we are coming up on another late spring, early summer. And I'm going to guess that gravel riding is just going to be even more popular. So, for those who are listening that are runners looking to expand their repertoire of athletic pursuits, what does Yuri have to say in terms of tips for getting started on a gravel bike?
Yeah. So the first tip is you don't have to have a specific gravel bike to go out and enjoy these roads. If you have a mountain bike, put skinnier tires on it. Road bike might be a little bit trickier, as you know, like unless tire clearance is the big thing. So with gravel riding, I mean, if you can ride your road bike on gravel roads, obviously, but being able to tolerate wider tires will sort of dictate where you can or can't go on your road bike. But the beauty of gravel is that it's not technical for the most part, like mountain biking. You're off the paved road, so you don't have to worry about motorists harassing you. And you don't, like I said, have to have a specific gravel bike because you could just convert your mountain bike with some skinnier tires and go out and enjoy it. Beyond that, I mean, there's so many different types of bikes and saddles and shoes and all these crazy things that you can get. But I think, gravel, one of the things that I find most enchanting about it is it allows you to see places much like trail running that most folks don't get to see. You can ride through history, get to these off the beaten path type zones where there's no cars or people, just sort of just find emptiness and beauty. And I've been fortunate enough, to be able to ride in some amazing places on my gravel bike over the last decade. So I don't know. We can keep riffing on that one too.
Yeah, the lack of cars or lack of cars going fast is fantastic. And for those who are new cyclists, hopefully it's a little less intimidating that way. When you don't have to worry about cars zipping by you who, they're texting or they're driving over the speed limit or whatnot.
Or they're angry that you're out on the road
That you exist.
Yeah. That you exist on your bike. I mean, for example, I just finished, as we talked about earlier offline, I was in Arches National Park shooting for ifit, highly trafficked park. 1.5 million visitors per year go to Arches. And it was the most nerve-wracking riding I have ever done while trying to conduct a point of view, workout with cars zipping by you. And we actually had to pause a segment because a motorist came by, kind of buzzed me and the cameraman, and then, dropped a few expletives on us. And I just looked up and I was like, dude, we got to pause for a second. I got to regroup here. Like, this just threw me off big time. So yeah, gravel, you don't have to deal with that. I mean, you go to a place like Idaho for Rebecca's Private Idaho or Kansas for Unbound. I mean, there are hundreds of miles of forest roads or farm roads, all on like grid systems where you might not see a car all day.
How do you find these roads?
Well, that's interesting because there aren't really a lot of resources for gravel riding. There is a website called Gravel Map, which is half decent, where you could like plug in a location and it'll pop up any rides, but it's like user generated. So it's dependent on people uploading their rides in that particular region to their site. I mean, if you just, I think, Googled, gravel races and started looking at like, Mid-South or Rooted or, there's a whole series up in Oregon, and maybe looking at their routes to give you some ideas. I mean, Strava heat maps, although I don't use those just because I'm familiar with a lot of the gravel around here. Those might be helpful for folks who are just getting into gravel. They can hit me up on the socials. I'll give them any knowledge that, I have. I love being able to, give people, pointers or insider tips on great gravel rides. I mean, to that point, on the way home, I'm coming back from Utah. I stopped on the I-70. I don't know if you've ever driven the I-70 out of Utah. It's kind of just like desert on all sides. But what you don't realize out there, you're near the San Rafael Swell, which is one of the most unique geologic features in the United States. It can be seen from space. I've never ridden there. One of my buddies was like, dude, you need to check out this Buckhorn Wash Road. So I stopped, didn't even like look on a map or anything. I just got on it and I did like this 50-mile out and back into like a mini Grand Canyon kind of zone. Saw one car the whole time. So yeah, there's a lot of ways people can discover. I mean, be curious, start poking around on maps, try to find those roads that are off the main highways or whatever. But that's just I think that's one of the reasons why gravel is blowing up so much in the last 5-6 years, is lack of cars and just this freedom out there to explore these places that you normally wouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So I built up a gravel bike with my dad last summer, and we rode it all around the Cape. And what was so cool about it is you can ride on the roads, and then you can see a road that looks cool, that's dirt, and go down it.
Yeah. And that might connect to another paved road that So now you're like, oh, wow, I could like bypass this segment on this dirt. And it just starts like, it's like choose your own adventure, right? Stories. It starts unlocking these different doors for you to see new zones. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy now is, as I said, I'm, becoming less of a racer and more of, I guess, an adventurer or whatever. But this ride coming home, I was so stoked to be out there in the middle of nowhere desert like Utah, but seeing this incredible landscape. It was mind blowing. And there's regions like that all over the place. So yeah, the gravel bikes allow us to just, get off the beaten path a little bit more, and you're not on mountain bike trails. So it's not technical might keep some people away from the sport, because I know mountain biking can be a little intimidating in that way too. So.
Yes, for sure. Well, I've got my gravel bike out here in Colorado, so if you make it one more state over, we'll have to go for a ride. So if people want to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, dude, east of you, right? I mean, you have a massive grid of country dirt roads, to my knowledge. I haven't done a ton of riding in Boulder, but like you go east towards Kansas and you've got dirt roads, farm roads for days.
For sure. Well, if we want to follow along with you and your adventures, where can we find you?
I am Y Hauswald, Hauswald on Instagram. I think I'm Yuri Hauswald on Twitter. I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook, but I'm Yuri Hauswald. There may be somebody called Salty the Yeti out there too that exists on socials. I'm not totally sure. That hasn't been confirmed. But so that's where people can find me. Like I said, message me. I'm happy to share my knowledge and stoke with folks around gravel or riding or training or nutrition. I'm not a trained nutritionist, so
take that. Roxanne for that.
We've got Roxanne, we've got Magda, but I do have 2 decades plus of using our products to some success. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, to some success, yeah, great success. Yeah. This has been a blast, and can't wait to share a ride with you at some point, hopefully this year.
Totally, man. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Am I the first non-runner on your show, or have you had non-runners before?
I had Caroline Burkle, who's a swimmer. I think you may be the first cyclist. So this will be
nice.
Hers was for the long swim. You're for the long ride.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah. And you were saying earlier, about how I interact with my athletes. While I am not a runner, I mean, I knew immediately who Kara Gauscher is because I've had to learn and educate myself because I work with those athletes. So it's been really fun to sort of expand my knowledge of different athletes and what they're doing on the run side of things, which is, kept me on my toes and kept my job interesting and fun.
There we go. All about the fun. All right, Yuri, thanks so much, and we'll see you out there.
Thanks, Jonathan.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.